Hello and welcome to the 3D Blu-ray Bunker. This is a place where we look exclusively at 3D Blu-rays, not to review the film, but to almost entirely focus on the various aspects of the 3D, with just a very short comment at the end about the film itself. And today we're looking at Denis Villeneuve's 2017 sequel to Blade Runner, 35 years after the original film came out. My understanding is that the post-converted 3D here was forced on the film by the studio, and it wasn't something that either Villeneuve or director of photography Roger Deakins had any interest in. And that sort of thing can certainly set off alarm bells if the film was staged and shot with no thought for 3D, and maybe it doesn't really fill you with confidence that it's going to be very impressive. Also, I think this is an odd film in some ways to have been given a 3D release, as whilst it comes under the umbrella of futuristic science fiction, like the original, this is a slow-paced and cerebral film whose main audience wouldn't really approach it looking for 3D thrills. In regard to that, though, it unfortunately turned out that there wasn't actually much of an audience for it in the cinema anyway, which probably shouldn't have been a massive surprise, as the original film had been met with a similar lack of interest on its original release. The film's opening shot nicely references the opening shot of the original film, and it's good to see right away that there's clearly a nice 3D effect visible in this eye, with probably a little bit more depth than you'd actually be able to see in reality this close up. Conversely, the film doesn't go the other way and show landscapes with an amount of depth particularly stronger than you'd see in reality, so no real hyper-stereo views in this film. That's not particularly unusual though, and it isn't necessarily a sign that the 3D is not going to be effective, but maybe an indication that it's going to be natural and tasteful. I should mention right up front that this is a stunning looking film. It's beautifully shot by one of the best in the business. The design, colours and lighting throughout the film make virtually every shot look like a work of art. Something that Roger Deakins seems to love is symmetry. There are a large number of shots in the film that not only have a gorgeous symmetry to them, but that symmetry is also complemented by depth, and so much so that it does sometimes feel like maybe he did shoot the thing with 3D in mind after all. So you can see here that these symmetrical shots all have lines of perspective stretching into the screen, and the three-dimensional depth here is very well implemented. So the view pushes deep into the screen, whether it's quite close shots like Ryan Gosling in the room here, or the view from above looking down as he takes a shower. It's the same thing with walls stretching into the screen, or in larger rooms like here with this incredible light dancing all over the place, and you've got walls left and right as well as the floor and ceiling all stretching way back into the frame. There's so much of this supreme composition all through the film, from internal architecture like these beautiful locations to more industrial views like this place here. It's so perfectly symmetrical. I don't know if this is actually a location or if it's a digital creation. It just seems too good to be true in a way. And even outdoors with these giant statues, there's no doubt that old Deakins does have quite an eye for what makes a good shot, hence his standing as one of the most respected directors of photography currently working. But what I think all of these shots also show is that, whether intentionally or by accident, he also has one of the best pairs of eyes when it comes to photographing a view for 3D. Every single one of these beautifully symmetrical views also has a large amount of three-dimensional depth to it, and the conversion does an excellent job of putting that depth into 3D space. So despite this film apparently having 3D conversion forced onto it by a money-grabbing studio, it does frequently feel hard to believe that it wasn't shot by somebody obsessed with how good it would look in 3D. As well as all that symmetry, Deakins appears to frame lots of shots with pieces of scenery on the left and right of the frame, which are strongly in the foreground, with something deep in the background. These are views that are very literally framed, and again done in a way that I'd say was unquestionably done to look good in 3D, even if that's apparently not the case at all. I suppose it does all suggest that if a shot is carefully framed in an interesting way, there's a good chance that it'll work in 3D. Anyway, all this framing is very effective at creating a sense of space, and that feeling of space is really how the 3D works well throughout the film. So in this view here, there's a large amount of volume in the empty space of the room, which in this instance helps with a feeling of apprehension. And here we get a really good feel for the space where Ryan Gosling's character lives, especially effective with the wall on the right hand side being up close, as the view of the kitchen on the left falls deep into the frame. And an even stronger view of the apartment has the rig on the ceiling pushed out of the screen, which I think helps to show it off and let us know that it's a significant piece of equipment. There are a few great moments where characters are behind glass, and the 3D works really well to enhance the emotion of the scene, like Ryan Gosling here, and I don't think I'm reading too much into it, but the 3D here helps the feeling of how he's stuck inside the car, and as such he's stuck in his role as a Blade Runner. And the 3D behind this window works beautifully, with an amazing job being done of placing them behind the window with all that rain on it. And here, the depth in the foreground snow helps to push the window and the view beyond it a long way into the frame. One of my favourite 3D shots in the film is this moment, where we're put into the character's eyes. It's almost like being in VR for a moment as we find ourselves literally washing blood off our hands. It's a powerful shot, and another one that's much more effective in 3D than flat. So it's pretty clear that this is a film where the 3D is about creating a sense of space and enhancing the mood, rather than being flashy and popping things out of the screen. The only things that I'd say were remotely cliched regarding the 3D are a couple of moments where guns pop out of the screen, and even these are done so much better than in many other films, where the gun might pop out, but it's either out of focus or breaking the confines of the screen. But again, these shots are done perfectly for 3D, mostly in good focus and fully within the frame. There are some other times where things emerge from the screen, but never in a hokey way. So there are scenes where snow swirls around, both in front of and behind the screen, in very nice pieces of 3D. And this is done so well that I wonder if this is digital snow, as the way it's been placed in 3D space is extremely impressive for a post-converted film. There's also this amazing shot, another one of the film's many standout moments, where these embers float around, and as we move through them, they morph into the lights of the buildings, and the view moves on through more snow in between buildings. And it's not just a beautiful 2D shot, but it's also a captivating piece of 3D. So again, I constantly found myself questioning the notion that this hadn't been filmed with 3D in mind. The film does a good job of creating solid and fully three-dimensional faces, which is something that Stereo D, who did this conversion, does brilliantly, and these faces often look more three-dimensional than in some natively shot 3D films. So like I said, the 3D here is never flashy or drawing attention to itself, but it absolutely is a massive enhancement to the feel of the film, drawing you into the world. It's maybe subtle, but it's hugely effective, like this moment of Ryan Gosling emerging from the mist, something I think would have been difficult to convert, but it's another fantastic piece of 3D. It's been well observed that 3D booms in the cinema have happened roughly every 30 years, with the first screenings in the 1920s and the golden age of the 50s, the 80s revival, and the biggest boom having been over the last decade. So by this logic, around about the time that this film is set, there could be another one. So it's interesting to see that most of the screens that we see in the film are two-dimensional. We do, though, see one of them with a fully three-dimensional display, which is a nice touch, and I do like seeing 3D screens in futuristic 3D films. One of the very difficult things to convert convincingly into 3D is complex vegetation, but in the shot here I don't think you could tell that this wasn't natively shot in 3D. It's perfectly done. To be fair, it is a static shot, so nowhere near as difficult as if the camera had been moving, where it often results in a bit of messed up 3D. But this is one of the great things about the film. The camera is often static or slow-moving, with long takes and virtually no fast editing and certainly no shaky cam. So alongside its sumptuous compositions, the film really does look like it was tailor-made to be turned into 3D. Views like this can look great in 3D too, and this is the kind of multiple layering effect that begs to be seen in 3D, and this staircase looks really good here. I think that the more detail there is in a shot, when that detail is spread across the Z-axis, the more instantly the 3D can impress, and that's the case with all of these people in these shots, where it looks like each and every one of them is occupying their own three-dimensional space. On the other hand, even when there's virtually nothing in the frame other than the flat plane of the ground, when that ground pushes away into the screen, the 3D effect is pleasing, and it gives a stronger sense of isolation to Ryan Gosling here standing alone on it. If I'm being stupidly nitpicky, I did notice one shot that I thought wasn't quite right. So here, where a transparent card is being held up, the background behind it appears to be placed in the same 3D plane as the card itself, and that really is about the only fault I'd say there is with the 3D in this film. There's a nice shot of a tripwire, where the wire comes out of negative parallax and into positive parallax. It's interesting that the 2019 native 3D film Gemini Man has an almost identical shot, and funnily enough, Gemini Man also had an underwater fight featuring good 3D bubbles and powerful 3D when the camera was half in and half out of the water, and there's virtually an identical scene to that in Blade Runner 2049 too. And thinking about it, both of them are science fiction films with artificially created characters raising the question of what it means to be created, but whereas one of these two films is a beautiful looking, thought-provoking, artfully made instant classic, the other one is a silly piece of fluff that looks like a daytime soap opera. Speaking of that underwater fight, there's a great point of view shot up from the character being held underwater, and the 3D here does a superb job of emphasising the feeling of being trapped under the surface. One of the ways in which the film builds on the original is that those massive neons from Ridley Scott's film are now giant three-dimensional signs, and this Coke can is appropriately brought into 3D space very effectively here. The whole cityscape is far more expansive than in the original film, and it offers some good 3D views when we're flying in between the buildings. I've got the film on 4K UHD as well, but having seen the 3D version, this is now the only way I'd ever want to watch it. I think it's a great example of the art of 3D, and it should be required viewing for anyone who doubts the validity of the process and is inclined to dismiss it as a gimmick. So a very quick word about the film itself. I think it does a perfect job of respecting and honouring the original, tonally, thematically and stylistically, with maybe some surprising returning characters, and the story here is more involved this time around, and it unfolds and develops in a more interesting way than in the first film. In fact, whilst there's nothing to match Rutger Hauer and his Tears in Rain monologue, and to be fair, that's one of the great moments in cinema history, I think that overall this is actually a better film, and it not only deserves a place at the table in any conversation about the best film sequels, but actually at the top table in conversations about cinematic masterpieces. Every performance is great, the music and sound is fantastic, and it's a film that leaves a lot to digest, and it doesn't offer simple conclusions or answers to the questions it raises. And speaking of raising questions, whilst this film explores the validity of life depending on the way in which it came into being, it also, probably without knowing, and I should imagine without being remotely interested, explores the validity of a film being in 3D. So to use an analogy, if a natively shot 3D film, or one which is carefully shot in readiness for conversion, if that's a human, and if one whose makers had no interest in it being turned into 3D but it has a conversion forced upon it, is a replicant, and if the replicant displays more human characteristics than the human, or in other words, the reluctantly converted film has better 3D qualities than the natively filmed one, then which film's 3D is more valid? Sorry if that was a little bit tortured and clumsy, but whatever this film's creative forces might think of 3D, I think that Blade Runner 2049 delivers an absolutely beautiful and triumphant stereoscopic experience, and I would absolutely, definitely recommend this. So I hope you found this in some way useful, and if so, I hope you'll join me again soon for another 3D Blu-ray review. Until then, thanks for looking in on this one, cheers for now, bye bye.